Alright, so time to talk about something that I've been thinking about for a long time, and even though I've been thinking about it for a long time, I'm still not exactly sure how to approach it. So there's no better way to do it than to simply do it, as they say. I even thought long and hard about what to title this, and today I want to talk about the benefit of the doubt, which, if you've already read the title, you already knew that was coming. But it's not quite that simple. There's actually three things that I want to talk about here, but they all kind of circle back to the same thing. Two of the points are going to be biblical references that I wanted to bring up because they're major facets of our culture, at least here in the West. One of them is going to be a philosophical razor, and the three of them tie together into what is essentially the benefit of the doubt. So I'm going to bring up these one at a time. I want to discuss them, and even though I'm no religious scholar or philosopher, even though I try to play one on the internet, I do believe that I have some insight into this that should be plenty valid without having to read every single edition of the Bible out there or recite the entire history of Grecian philosophy. So why don't we get started? The three things that I want to start with or do today is I want to cover the Golden Rule. That is from the Sermon on the Mount, that is simplified into do unto others as you would have them do unto you. From the same Sermon on the Mount, I also want to take on the concept of turning the other cheek. After that, I want to go into philosophy to discuss Hamlin's razor. And if you don't know what that is, don't worry, we'll get to it. Then I'm going to cover what these three things have in common and their application in modern day. So let's start. The Golden Rule. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is something that we teach to many people, usually as children. It's supposed to be a guiding principle, as most religious things are. I mean, religion is a set of faith and things like that, but primarily, religion was, and continues to be a way to live by. I mean, you can believe in God if you choose to, you can believe in prophets if you choose to, but religion, text, doctrines, all these things are simply instructions for how we should live to be good, moral people. And the Golden Rule is called the Golden Rule for a reason. It is, and should be, the guiding principle for how we should all live on a daily basis. If you look at all the doctrines in, well, at least Christianity, but most of your Abrahamic religions, it is the guiding principle for all of them. Regardless of what commandments there are, what statements are made, they all come back to this one rule, and that is that we should treat each other the way we would like to be treated. In general, that's pretty simple. We all want to be treated like decent people. We would all like to be respected. We would all like to be, spoken to politely. We would all like to not be transgressed upon. We would not like to be attacked. And so, if we would not like these things, why would anyone else like them? We should treat others as we would like to be treated. It's a very simple concept, elegantly summed up in one statement. But there's a problem with it. There's a failing with it. And that doesn't mean that it's bad. I want to be very clear. The Golden Rule is wonderful, but it does have a weakness. And that is, it is a little bit too absolute. Treat others as you would have them treat you is fantastic, but it's incomplete because it doesn't tell you what to do if somebody doesn't. I mean, let's say that you are a good person and you would generally like people to be good to you. That's fine. But as we know, we live in a world with crime and cruelty. And sooner or later, usually in most people's lives, you will have someone who does something to you. Now, it doesn't have to be a major crime. It could be something small. Somebody took something of yours. That's technically theft. Somebody has lied to you. Somebody has insulted you. No one gets through their entire life without having somebody transgress against them. In general, this should not be a big deal. And this is where we're going to get into the other part of that Sermon from the Mount. That's important because these two things go together. I just wanted to cover this one first. The idea that we should treat others as we want to be treated. If we go by the letter of what that says, then that does mean, and most Christian scholars that I read up on tend to agree, that we treat others as we would want to be treated, even as they transgress against us. I mean, if somebody were to steal from you, that is not something that you would generally want, but it also does not mean that you go and steal from them in return. That's revenge, that's vengeance, and that's generally a bad idea. If you want to go for a more spiritual side, it's a bad idea because any kind of transgressive action like that is a taint on the soul. From a practical standpoint, then if you steal from them, it may cause escalation. We don't necessarily want to escalate if we can avoid it, although if it's unavoidable, as I explained in another video, then sometimes you just have to go and do it. But for most of us in our daily lives, it doesn't have to be an escalation. We have laws and we have police and courts and things to deal with this in less transgressive ways, I guess I could say. It's not entirely true, but it sounds good on paper. So do unto others. It's a good philosophy, but it's a little too literal and not nearly comprehensive enough. So I'm going to leave that one behind for the moment, and I want to go to the idea of turning the other cheek. I can't remember the exact wording, but it goes something akin to, if somebody should strike you upon the cheek, rather than strike back, you should simply turn them the other. And on its face, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Because if somebody has already struck you, why would you give them the opportunity to do it again? And this is where a lot of people have a bit of a falling out with the idea of turn the other cheek, because they only look at it from that perspective. But I think I can shed some light on that. See, turning the other cheek doesn't necessarily mean that you offer yourself up. I mean, if someone is going to beat you, and they've already hit you once, generally speaking, probably a bad idea to simply let them continue to do it. But that's not inherently what turning the other cheek is about. When they tell you to do this, what they're essentially saying is, if somebody has hit you, or they have transgressed upon you in some way, you should not take action. And instead, you should simply turn the other cheek and give them the opportunity. And when I say it like that, it doesn't sound great. But there is a secret brilliance in this. And I want to get to that more so when I get to the next philosophical concept. But that is essentially what turning the other cheek is. If somebody does something, rather than react, you let them act. And why would you let them do this? Well, number one, because this gives you the chance to calm yourself so that you do not act rashly. Remember, do unto others. Well, if we wanted to do unto others as they did to us, then if somebody stole from us, then we would steal from them. We don't want to do that. Usually. Mostly. Like most of the time, we don't want to do that. And so turning the other cheek says, if somebody were to steal from you, maybe don't do anything this time. But again, like the golden rule, I think it's incomplete. And I think it's incomplete because it was written in kind of a shorthand. I think the idea behind a lot of these biblical passages, and in fact most of the books in the Bible, is because they needed to be interpreted. There's very little in the Bible I found that you can take at face value. Most of it needs to be interpreted, and that's where priests came in. I mean, aside from the fact that once upon a time most people couldn't even read it, and they needed to have it read to them and then interpreted for them, I think by and large most people still need to have it interpreted. So we're going to leave this one behind right now, and I know I'm going a little bit fast. Don't worry, you can watch this video twice if you need to. And I want to move on to Hamlin's razor because it's going to tie these other two things together. Now, Hamlin's razor is a philosophical razor. Now, what is a philosophical razor? A philosophical razor is a tool that you can use to help shave away arguments and try to make them as clear and simple as possible. For example, I think I have one here, don't I? Didn't I? Yes, I did. Occam's razor. One that maybe many of you out there have heard of says simpler explanations are more likely to be correct and to avoid unnecessary or improbable assumptions. We've all experienced that one. We can look at a problem and say, well, this could have happened, this could have happened, this could have happened, but what if the simple option happened? We can make all the assumptions in the world, and the more complicated we make it, the more likely it is to be wrong. The simplest solution tends to be the right one. So then we come to Hamlin's razor. That was Occam's. This is Hamlin's. Hamlin's razor you may have heard before as well. It says, never attribute to malice that which can be adequately explained by stupidity. Or I like to throw in there incompetence. But they're essentially the same thing. And the entire idea of Hamlin's razor is that if someone does something and it harms you in some way, it would be easier to assume, initially, that they did not intend it, that it was a mistake. Perhaps they didn't realize the consequences of their actions, perhaps they didn't realize that it would impact you at all, they didn't simply factor you into their equations, but it did, and they didn't intend it to. And so, rather than assuming they did so, and potentially escalating to something else from there, then perhaps we should just assume that maybe they didn't know what happened, or where it was happening, or to whom it was happening to, and we should investigate to find out more. This goes back somewhat to turning the other cheek, in that both of them express the desire to avoid reaction and investigate further. Now, the reason why I wanted to do turning the other cheek first before Hamlin's razor is because the text of turn the other cheek basically says if somebody strikes you, turn them the other cheek. This does two things. Number one, it will avoid any unnecessary assumptions. I mean, perhaps we've all been in a situation where we're in a somewhat crowded area, maybe you're trying to move through a crowd, somebody turns and they elbow you, or they hit you with their hand. And then they look back to you, and if we've been in that situation, they look at you and they say, oh my God, I'm sorry. I can't believe I did that. And why would they say that? Well, because they didn't intend to. And that's the simplicity of it. Attribute not to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. Now, stupidity in this circumstance doesn't mean that they're necessarily a stupid person, but they weren't being aware of their surroundings, and therefore when they moved, they struck you. It's simple, right? The idea of turning the other cheek means that you also let that go after they have hit you, and you instead say, you have the opportunity to do it again. Now, most people wouldn't do that. And that kind of goes back to the golden rule, because most people don't want to hit each other. So they're not going to treat you that way. That's not the way they would want to be treated. They didn't intend to do it, and so when you offer them your other cheek, they don't do it. And there's the simple elegance of it. You give them the opportunity to transgress upon you again, and they don't do it. But if you're clever, you may see where I'm going with this. So we get back to Hamlin's razor, and we say, attribute not to malice that which can be explained by incompetence or stupidity. And all of these three things tie together. And it took me a while to realize that what we're talking about in all three of these things is the benefit of the doubt as we colloquially know it. When it comes to the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This makes the assumption that people, in general, are good, want to be treated well. And so if you treat them well, they will treat you well. This is giving them an automatic benefit of the doubt. Before you've even met them, this applies to an absolute stranger. By simply following the golden rule, you have given every stranger you meet the blanket benefit of the doubt. Now, in turning the other cheek, you are deliberately leaving yourself exposed to somebody after they have transgressed upon you and saying, I do not believe that you would have done this. It would have been a violation of the golden rule. Therefore, I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt and giving you the opportunity to do so again if this was actually your intention. And if they do nothing, congratulations. The benefit of the doubt was beneficial. If they don't, well, we'll get to that in a minute. And with Hamlin's razor, attribute not to malice that which can be explained by incompetence is also the benefit of the doubt. Just like with turning the other cheek, it has said that whatever you have done, I am making the assumption that you did not intend the consequences that you had. So all three of these things are both the same thing, or at the very least interrelated. Now, why do I want to talk about this today? Well, I've wanted to talk about this one for a while, but what really drove this home this week is I have been following the Jussie Smollette case in Chicago. Now, if you're unfamiliar with the case, I'm going to make it very, very short. And I'm not going to put a lot of details in here. Like I said, very short. On a January morning in, I think, 2021, I forget exactly when, in Chicago, during a polar vortex, which means that the temperatures were about -20 outside, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I believe, the actor/activist Jussie Smollette was walking through downtown Chicago, again at 2 a.m. in the morning, on his way to a Walgreens to buy eggs. When he arrived at the Walgreens, he found out that the Walgreens was closed because it's 2 a.m. And so instead, he went to Subway, which I'm guessing is open at 2 a.m., to get a sandwich. On his way home, after retrieving his sandwich, he was accosted by two men in red hats, who were white, who yelled at him, "This is MAGA country," in Chicago, which hasn't even voted for anything purple in I don't know how long. But they yelled, "This is MAGA country." They doused him in bleach. They hung a noose around his neck. And then they left. Now, immediately, a lot of people had some suspicions about this. And it has been a very, very lengthy court case that has been going on for over a year, collecting evidence, doing interviews, and when the case came through, it immediately fell apart. The case concluded just last week. Week before? It's been less than 2 weeks, I think. But it concluded with the judgment that this entire thing was fake. And after going through evidence and communications, bank records, interviewing people, they found out that this had all been set up. Extensively set up, in fact. And the end result was that after what the judge himself described as about 4 hours or so of perjury from Jussie Smollette himself, he was convicted of 5 counts of lying to the police and some other aggravating factors in there somewhere. I don't remember exactly what they were. But he was sentenced and he went to jail. He didn't stay in jail, of course, because eventually, due to circumstances that I'm still trying to understand myself, he was let out. Something about his appeal, and they're not going to hold him in jail until his appeal is done, in which case then he either goes back or his original conviction is overturned. So that's the very, very short of it. And that's as short as I could make it without just saying he did a hate crime and then he was guilty. That doesn't quite paint the right picture. So I wanted to do this now in light of the Jussie Smollette case, because we are dealing with, at its core, the benefit of the doubt here. Now, in general, we all tend to give each other the benefit of the doubt, and that applies to law as well. Well, arguably. Depends on who you ask. Because some people definitely have some very charged opinions on them. And if you have charged opinions on this, leave them in the comments. I love having these discussions. But, anyway, we went into this with largely the benefit of the doubt. When it first came out, many, many people assumed that this hate crime was entirely real, entirely legitimate, ignoring everything else that was happening at the time. Ignoring the 2 a.m. part of it, the polar vortex negative 20-degree temperatures at the time, the fact that there is not a single registered Republican in Chicago. By the way, that's hyperbole. Don't fact check that. I know how you people are. Ignoring all of that, people gave him the benefit of the doubt. Now, there were a lot of people that didn't. And I'll tell you why they didn't. Because a lot of people here saw this as a hate crime. But there is a long, long history going back the last 5 to 8 years of there being numerous hate crimes across the United States and even some in other countries like Canada and Great Britain. And inexorably, almost every single one of them has been found to be a hoax. I say almost because there are some that are still up for investigation. There are some that were actually true. But when I say most, I'm talking about 95%. And I say 95% because there have been a whole lot of them. And the ones that were true or still under investigation were vastly outcounted by the ones that were fake. Now, why would somebody fake a hate crime? I mean, think about that. Why would anyone do that? Well, the answer is usually pretty simple. Usually it's for attention. Now, is it attention for fame? Maybe, not usually. For monetary gain? Well, they do tend to be kind of profitable with the donations that pour in. GoFundMe cases, things like that. They can be very profitable. And sometimes they're done by activists who want to push a certain message, and believe me, we'll get to that in a minute. But many of them have turned out to be absolute hoaxes. In this case, it's the boy who cried wolf. Now, everyone who grew up in Western civilization, I should hope, grew up with the boy who cried wolf. To make a short story even shorter, in a small village, there is a flock of sheep and a shepherd. The shepherd tasks a boy with watching over his sheep. Now, the boy gets tired of staying out there all by himself, and in want for attention, he raises the alarm saying that there are wolves. And since wolves will eat sheep, and you don't want to lose your sheep, people came with pitchforks and shovels and everything else to ward off the wolves. There was no wolf. The next day, he did it again, and of course there was still no wolf, but the village came anyway. On the third day, there actually was a wolf, and when he cried wolf, no one listened to him, and the wolf ate him instead of the sheep. I think it's a German tale, because that's usually how the German tales end. Anyway, I do that because that's the same place we are in with the hoax hate crimes. Now, in general, when there's a hate crime that is committed, before there's any investigation, you're always going to have a lot of people who are going to come out and they're going to instantly be behind the person who was victimized by this crime. That's understandable. We are, in general, good people, and we want to help people in general. So it's an easy play if you want to gain sympathy, attention, or just gain resources. But as the years have gone on and more of these cases have come out, the number of people who have been coming out has been less and less. Because every time one of them is exposed to be a hoax, it means that we give the benefit of the doubt less. And every time it happens and less people show up, Well, we get back to these three topics. Number one, Hamlin's razor. I'm going to work my way backwards. So, Hamlin's razor says, attribute not to malice that which can be explained by stupidity. Now, when the first hate crimes were coming out, most people came out and said, okay, this person has faked a hate crime. Surely there must have been a reason for this. Is it because they needed money, and this was the only way they thought they could get it? Perhaps they needed attention in some way that they weren't getting in other places. Maybe they were just simply mentally unwell, and they need to have help that their community is not giving them. These are all absolutely valid. The problem is that when it happened twice, and they were both found out to be hoaxes, many people said, okay, but we just had this, we were just educated on this. Why is this person doing it? And that's when you had the first people saying, maybe it's not incompetence. Perhaps it's malice. And then when it happened a third time, and it was found to be a hoax, more people said that perhaps now it's malice. Now fast forward through the years. 7 years ago, 6 years ago, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way up to the Jussie Smollette case. Well, many people out there have now given up on the benefit of the doubt. And it's very difficult to blame them for that. Because what we see in the Smollette case was an absolute, genuine, premeditated attempt to stir up conflict on a racial basis, on a political basis. The fact is, number one, he brought in politics. And when he got people to say, this is MAGA country, he was attempting to paint an entire political faction as hateful bigots. And the people who actually did believe it were more than happy to help back that up. He also tried to create racial divisions because he is a black man, and he said that the people that did it were in fact white men, which we found out during the trial was in fact not the case. But I'm not going to get into that right now. That is not pertinent to this right now. What is pertinent is by the time that the Smollette event happened, many people had long since lost their giving the benefit of the doubt to this person. And they immediately said, there are too many things about this that don't make sense. We've seen enough of these hoaxes before. We should believe nothing. Nothing he says, nothing he's done until we have an investigation. And many people did not. And it was because of those people who did not, in fact, that so much digging was done, and we ended up where we are. I want to talk about the benefit of the doubt because these people are no longer giving it. We are now ignoring Hamlin's razor to say, rather than assuming that people are doing these things out of incompetence, we should instead be assuming that they're doing this out of malice. And that is not good. But like I said before with the golden rule, it's also not complete. And I'm going to get to that in just a minute as well. When we start assuming that it's done by malice, that also means that we no longer turn the other cheek anymore. Okay? Rather than giving somebody the opportunity to either prove that it was malicious, we simply do not give them the opportunity to prove that they're malicious. And this is also not a good thing. We do not give people a second chance to try and harm us, regardless of what the reason was. And then we get back to the golden rule itself, which says, do unto others as we would have them do unto you. Well, when you already know that somebody is not going to return your gestures, when somebody is not going to do unto you as you would have them do, why should you treat them that way in the first place? And that's the real kicker right there, because when we stop giving the benefit of the doubt, and we start assuming intention for everything, it basically means that we have abandoned the constitutional concept of innocent until proven guilty, and we have adopted guilty until proven innocent. Now, depending on who you talk to, and I would be lying if I said that I wasn't among those people, we abandoned innocent until proven guilty a long time ago. But we do like to pretend, so we're going to continue to pretend here. It's not a good way to live. We cannot go around presuming that everything we do is a matter of guilt. But it does beg the question of where do we go from here, and how do we proceed forward? Because if we can't live that way, if we cannot live not turning the other cheek, not doing unto others, not following Hamlin's razor, not giving people the benefit of the doubt, but we also cannot continue to operate as we have been, where do we go from here? And this is where I actually want to give something a little bit more uplifting for a change, because I know whenever I do these direct messages, they are all very, very much doom and gloom. Usually I tell you that, yes, we have ideals, and our ideals don't work, and I'm not gonna veer from that today. But I do have a solution. As the hoax hate crimes have shown us, as various other stories, such as the stories that Black Lives Matter puts out there with, like, hands up, don't shoot, and other things like that, we should not be giving the benefit of the doubt. Not anymore. And I know I just said that this wasn't going to be all doom and gloom, but I'm actually going to agree with a lot of very cynical people and say we should not be giving the benefit of the doubt anymore. I think a lot of people have cast it aside. They don't deserve it anymore. I believe it was in the Batman Begins movie. How was that? It was when Batman and Ra's al Ghul met. And nope, I forgot it. I don't remember it. But they had something similar to that. I mean, you can't. Oh, nope, I remember what it was. It was when Batman was learning how to be the Batman. But he had established early on that he would not kill. And his mentor, Ra's al Ghul, had told him that your principles, your morals, these chains that you shackle yourself with, are not things that your enemies are going to give you. They are not going to share your principles. You refuse to kill, but they will kill you in a moment. And if anyone is familiar with Batman, that was absolutely true. Batman used all sorts of tools and all sorts of fancy tricks and gimmicks in fighting to avoid killing people, and the people he was fighting against were armed with guns, knives, crowbars. They tried to hit him with vehicles. They tried to, burn him alive. They did all kinds of things. And so it is true that these are things that the actual criminals in the world will not offer us. And that's kind of the rub. You see, most people are good. The bad people are bad, though. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, but it's simplistic for a reason. There are out there bad people. There are people out there who do not go about their day with the assumption they're going to be good people, and then they just see something that's too tempting. No, there are people out there in the world who actively look to take advantage of other people. And this has been true going back as long as humanity has existed. There will always be people who will say it is easier to prey on others than it is to actually build something myself. And you can see this everywhere in the world, whether you're looking at crime on your local level, just in your neighborhood, or you can look at the global level, Russia versus Ukraine. There are bad nations out there too. There are bad cultures out there. And they find it easier, instead of working hard and building on their own, to simply attack others and take from them. So how do we move forward in a world with bad people in it, who absolutely do intentionally and willingly wish to do us harm while maintaining the golden rule, turning the other cheek, using Hamlin's razor, and affording the benefit of the doubt. It's actually very simple, and we've already got a maxim for it. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Now, it's the prepper's motto, and it is a little on the cynical side, especially when you want to apply it to people, but it is true. When dealing with people, you really should be expecting the worst. And I hate to go through life like that, but unfortunately, life is not nice. The world is not your friend. Nature is cruel. And if you don't expect the worst from it, it will eat you alive. And it will ask for more. So when you go out, you should expect the worst. Expect that you may be in a car crash. Expect that you may be mugged. Expect that, somebody could steal your car. Maybe you could be carjacked. Go out expecting these things to happen. But don't be depressed about it. Don't be cynical about it. Be prepared for it. Say, I could be mugged on my way home. So, I am going to, number one, secure my belongings. Make sure that I'm only carrying what I need to. Make sure that somebody knows where I am at all times. So if you're walking home from work, somebody knows when you left work and when you should be home. And if you don't show up home, have a plan. Be prepared. That also means that when something like a hoax hate crime happens, because most of them are hoaxes, we should be prepared for that too. That doesn't mean that we assume that the person who did it is a monster. But it does mean that we assume that it's not real until we can prove it. Now, there's a very common phrase out there that was, I believe, made by the Women's March. I don't know, I could be wrong on that one. But they promoted this idea of listen and believe because they said that the justice system doesn't work against, women and in cases of rape and all these other things. And because of that, we should listen to women and believe them when they say something happened. Now, of course, that has been abused because that is what bad people do. While there are actual victims of crimes out there who are women, and these were crimes against women, many, many others have come out with stories that turned out to later be false. And so this gave rise to listen but investigate. Or listen but ask. Whatever way you want to phrase it. The idea that because so many people have abused this, now we're going to be prepared. When something like this happens, we are going to listen, and then we're going to start asking questions. And we're going to find out what the actual facts are instead of simply acting on what we're told. This is going to have to be true to almost every single aspect of our culture and civilization for a long time now. Because for a long time, we did operate under these three rules. People talk about the good old days when, we didn't have these problems and we had officer friendly in the neighborhood, and if somebody was broken into, then we just ran over to help them out right away. Because no one lied about this stuff. And why would they? What did they really have to gain? And what would they sacrifice in lying about it to gain it? A lot of this actually comes back to a cultural problem that we're having right now. We have become a prideful, shameless culture. The latter part of that more important than the first part of it, but I find it hard to believe that you can be that prideful without also being that shameless. Shame used to be a part of our culture because your standing in your community was dependent on your reputation. But we don't really have communities anymore. Not as we used to. We have online communities and television communities and things like that, where it doesn't actually matter what kind of reputation or support we have in our local community when we can have 10 times that elsewhere. Combine that with the fact that most of us don't even know who our neighbors are these days, and we have grown a culture where there is no shame, because why would you feel shame? Why would you be shamed in front of any anonymous person on the internet? Why would you be shamed by anyone in your own neighborhood whom you don't even know their names, much less rely on them in any sort of way? We have no common community, and we have no common culture. And so when we go back to our first 3 parts of giving the benefit of the doubt here, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Well, we don't care about other people, and so we don't really care how we treat them, because we don't anticipate them ever treating us at all. I mean, we don't need to worry about them treating us badly if they simply never interact with us. Turning the other cheek, well, that's not really a big deal if you never actually interact with anyone around you. And Hamlin's razor, well, same thing. If you never interact with anyone, then, or in your local area, then it never happens. So no one has anyone to be accountable to. No one has any shame. And since no one has any shame, if ever they feel the need to, the desire, or the opportunity, then yes, they too can hoax a hate crime and hope for support from their greater community across the world. So that got a little, there's a little bit of a diatribe there at the end, but this is a cultural problem. And I have to make sure that I relate it back to that, because culture is the only way we're going to fix it. We should be giving the benefit of the doubt to people, but we can't afford to, because it leaves us open, it leaves us exposed, and even if doing it once doesn't hurt you, if you continue to do it, sooner or later it will. And you can only afford to do it so many times. You can only be hurt so many times. You can only be taken from so many times until eventually you have nothing left. Sooner or later, it's actually going to become a problem for you. And so we can't allow it anymore. But that doesn't mean that we punish innocent people, normal people, good people, for the actions of the few. So instead, as we move forward, we must continue to give the benefit of the doubt. We must continue to do unto others. But we must also be prepared that when it's not reciprocated, that we simply do away with it entirely. And we treat these people as what they are, and that is hostile. Hostile to you, hostile to your community. Whatever that community may be. Whether it's your neighborhood, your religious community, your hobby community, whatever it is. Because this is not relegated to simply politics or race. We have seen this along gender lines. We have seen this in hobby circles. It's everywhere. It's rampant. It is a problem. It is like unto a disease infecting our culture. And the proper way to deal with a disease is to take preventative measure. So, make sure to give the benefit of the doubt, but make sure to have a backup plan for when it's not reciprocated. This is a simple preparation that you can do, and with any luck, it will both keep you safe in your relationships, and it will help you screen out any people in your relationships who may not actually have your best interest in mind, and certainly don't deserve to have their best interest in your mind. So, things to think about. Kind of a long video, but I think it was an important topic that needed to be covered now. While a lot of this stuff is still going on, and a lot of it is fresh in people's minds. So, if you want more stuff like this, then make sure you subscribe, make sure you hit the bell icon so you're here for every video when they come out. If you know somebody else who could really use some advice from this video, or just, the philosophical, cultural education on it, share this video with them. It's all of like 45 minutes long. Make some tea, have a snack, listen to the video. It's good. Then come back, leave a like on the video, leave a comment down below. especially if you think that I got something wrong here or you'd like to add to it, or if you have topics yourself that you would like me to cover. I mean, I do research on these things, so even if I'm not quite up on the topic you want covered, I'll do some research into it so I at least sound like I know what I'm talking about. So if you want, or leave a comment down below, and I will see you next time. Until then, take care.